circles as she's been a passionate voice and very proactive on issues of upland conservation and recreational access for many years. Helen completed her studies in UCD with a BSc in Rural Development, which has informed her approach to sustainable and balanced development across the island of Ireland. In her early career, Helen worked as Development Officer with the Mountaineering Council of Ireland, the precursor to Mountaineering Ireland. She subsequently worked as the Countryside Recreation Officer with Wicklow Uplands Council, and indeed was a key contributor to the success and longevity of the Wicklow Uplands Council as a model for building upland partnerships. Since 2010, Helen has worked as the Hill Walking, Access and Conservation Officer of Mountaineering Ireland. As you may know, Mountaineering Ireland is the national representative body for hill walkers and climbers, and Helen's work focuses on securing and improving access to the uplands and coastal areas for recreational access. Helen focuses very much on dialogue and positive relationship building among landowners, farmers, communities, statutory agencies and recreational users, while always promoting the responsible use of the mountain environment. Anybody who reads the Mountaineering Ireland journal, the Irish Mountain Log, will be familiar with Helen's excellent journalistic contributions to understanding of the complex interaction of uplands conservation, permissive access and respect for landowners and the environment. Helen has been an active Mountaineering Ireland representative in Corlin na Tuatha for many years and was central to the development of the pilot mountain access scheme, as evidenced in the McGillicuddy Reeks Forum in Kerry and Binsleva or Mount Gable in Galway. With Corla, Helen was highly involved in the development of the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy, working with the Department of Rural and Community Development. The strategy forms a key element for integrated and sustainable management of access and conservation of the Irish uplands for the coming decade. Helen, you're very welcome, and we look forward to your talk now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks for covering for such a detailed introduction. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't put John up to any of that. Look, you're all very welcome. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to contribute to the Irish Uplands Forum's Autumn Lecture Series and to speak with you tonight about the challenges of managing upland recreation. And yes, there are challenges, but this is also a time of huge positivity and opportunity in the outdoor recreation space in Ireland. So the plan for the talk, a little bit more introduction. I'm going to talk about challenges in managing outdoor recreation, and I decided to try and limit myself to 7 challenges, but then to talk more about the opportunities that each of those challenges present, and to draw some conclusions, and hopefully that'll leave us with a good time for questions afterwards. So that's a picture of me out in the hills on the 12 Bens, as John will and others will probably quickly realize, one of my favorite areas for hill walking, and that is my background. I'm a hill walker. I've been walking Ireland's mountains for well over 30 years, and particularly like this kind of landscape, relatively wild, untracked and rocky and rugged. I grew up at the foothills of the Blackstairs Mountains in County Wexford, so mountains have been part of my life, all of my life really. I now live in the Wicklow Mountains, very close to Lugnaquilla, and just about 4 kilometres from the village of Rathdangan in West Wicklow, and I'm an active volunteer in the community there, so I understand the challenges faced by rural communities as well. I have been, as John has mentioned, I've been working as Access and Conservation Officer for Mountaineering Ireland for the last 13 years. Prior to that, worked with the Wicklow Uplands Council, and earlier in the role of Development Officer in Mountaineering Ireland. So you can see there are 22 years working in this space, and even before that I was a volunteer in Mountaineering Ireland on Mountaineering Ireland's Environmental Committee, as it was then, and also on Mountaineering Ireland's first hill walking committee. And if you scrape back a little bit further, you'll find that Frank and myself were together part of the organisation of a conference in 1995 that led to the establishment of the Irish Uplands Forum. So it's fantastic to be with you tonight, looking at where we are today in managing recreation in Ireland's mountain areas. A little bit about Mountaineering Ireland, then to add, I suppose, to what John has already said. We're the national representative body for hill walkers and climbers, and we cover all aspects of mountaineering across the island of Ireland. We're a membership organisation. We've over 16,000 members, the majority of whom are affiliated through 190 clubs across the country. We are governed by a board of volunteers. We currently have 10 people on the board, some of whom are in that photograph that's on screen. And we have 11 staff, soon to be 12, hopefully. We're interviewing tomorrow for a new administrator. And the photograph itself is part of our story too. The photograph is taken on Logalaw, or Fancy Mountain, in the Wicklow Mountains, part of Logalaw Estate, which some of you will know changed hands a few years back. The man on the left in the photograph is Michael Keegan. Michael is the estate foreman or the farm manager at Logalaw. And the photograph was taken during Mountaineering Ireland's autumn gathering last October. And Michael joined us for a while for a walk through the estate, where we learned about the environmental management plan for Logalaw. And it's a tremendously positive story of investment in the restoration of an iconic mountain landscape to try and bring the habitats there into better condition, and indeed improving both natural and built heritage. The man third from the right in the back row should be mentioned too. That's Alan Lauder. Alan is an ecologist, and he worked on the environmental management plan for Logalaw, but he's also the current chair of Mountaineering Ireland's Access and Conservation Committee, so somebody I'm working with on a regular basis. And the man in the middle at the back with the blue fleece and is David Pollard, the chair of the Mountaineering Ireland board and a member of Club Coolin, Dublin Wicklow based club. Anyway, let's keep going. That's a summary, or the key strategic priorities in Mountaineering Ireland's current strategic plan. And I'm reminded, actually, looking at this, that Frank Nugent worked on Mountaineering Ireland's very first strategic plan. I think this might be the 6th or the 7th one at this stage. But you'll see that the priorities there include promoting responsible participation in our activities, supporting our members and clubs, working to improve access and care for the mountain environment, and supporting all those involved in our activities to achieve their full potential. As John has mentioned, my main area of focus with Mountaineering Ireland is on improving access, protecting the mountain environment, promoting responsible recreation. And I suppose that lends itself very naturally to the theme that I was given for tonight's talk of managing the challenges of managing recreation in Ireland's upland areas. And as Frank pointed out, that is a photograph from the summit of Lugnaquilla, close to where I live, taken on a busy summer day. A reminder to us all that participation in mountain activities has increased. There are more and more people out there. That adds to the challenges, but it has its pluses too, because in all the time I've been involved in this area as a volunteer or working in the sector, Never before has there been such great political interest in outdoor recreation and hill walking and indeed climbing. And I think it's our challenge to make the most of that and to address the challenges that we all see. So look, moving through to those challenges. The first one I've identified is to do with clarity, or rather the lack of clarity regarding where you can and cannot go in our upland areas. And this photograph is of a lovely laneway leading into the hills in County Galway. But there's nothing there to tell you that you can walk there, walk past a farm buildings to get to the start of this route. So not surprisingly, that lack of clarity around land ownership and access does present a challenge to people walking here. I'll go a step further and say that I believe that it's also the greatest barrier to the development of outdoor recreation in Ireland, north and south, because while there is access legislation in Northern Ireland, it doesn't really result in a much better situation. It is similar, and in some respects, even less good than it is in the Republic of Ireland, particularly with the momentum around our new National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. I probably should mention too, Mountaineering Ireland's policy in relation to access. Our access policy is that we are seeking reasonable access for responsible users. And by that, we mean we want to have the ability to move about freely on hills, mountains, and coastal lands. And we need some means of connecting between the public road and those places. And that could be an agreed access route, or indeed it could even be a public right of way. So I'm going to move through to then second challenge, and it's one that was alluded to in some of the preamble before we started tonight. The fear amongst many landowners that should somebody become injured on their land, that they might be sued. And while Ireland's occupiers' liability legislation changed in 1995 in recognition of the fact that many people were entering onto private property to engage in recreation activities, some of which, well, all of which involve some degree of risk, it was the intention of government at that time that landowners should not be exposed to liability should somebody become injured. And the 95 legislation has stood us quite well. We had a really positive judgment from the Supreme Court in 2005, I think, in relation to an accident that took place at Rossnowla. And look, the word accident is important. It can be lost on some people that injuries do occur in the outdoors. Doesn't mean somebody else is responsible. And the reason I've got that photograph there, and some of you will realize this, that boardwalk is part of the Wicklow Way. The boulder in the centre is actually where the J.B. Malone Memorial is. And a lady fell on that boardwalk in 2013, subsequently took a case because she had cut her knee and required 6 stitches. And bizarrely, despite the legislation, she was awarded 40 grand in the circuit court. Many of you will realise that that judgment was appealed to the High Court, and Mountaineering Ireland supported the State Claims Agency and the National Parks and Wildlife Service, who were actually the landowners at that location. We supported the appeal and gave evidence in the appeal, and I'm really pleased to say that that was overturned with a really strong judgment in February of 2017. So, nonetheless, fear of claims remains. Yeah, I took that photograph in the Annalong Valley in the Mournes just a month ago, and while there are lots of people going into the mountains who are not quite prepared either for the terrain or the weather conditions. Most of them don't have wheeled luggage, but nonetheless, the lack of awareness amongst some people is a challenge. Lack of awareness of need to care for their own safety, but also lack of awareness of the sensitivity of upland habitats, lack of awareness around dogs, and indeed on that day we met many people with dogs as well. Matters such as parking, even barbecues and fires. So when we're talking about managing recreation in Ireland's uplands, we are talking a lot about managing people's behaviour. Some people's preparation extends no further than taking a dropped pin and hitting go or putting it into Google Maps and away they go. A lot of people just don't think. And in trying to influence their behavior, we're trying to get into that process and just help make them aware of the sensitivity of the places they're going, the preparations they need to make, and how they can avoid causing any adverse impacts for local people or for the natural environment. Next challenge I looked at, and you'll notice the 7 C's start with C. Communications, and these days the challenge of communications is it's dominated by social media because that is a really big driver for recreation activity, and it's a driver that can result in huge escalations in visitor numbers very, very quickly, and sometimes to places that are in private ownership or that have no infrastructure, no agreed access, and that can have really serious consequences. Those of you familiar with the Wicklow Mountains will recognise Loch Uller, which is just below Tonlagee, the 3rd highest mountain in Wicklow. And the fact that it is distinctively heart-shaped is what has caused Loch Uller to be a huge focus of people's attention and efforts in recent years. Loch Uller sits within Wicklow Mountains National Park, and the impact of increased visitor numbers around the mountain is really creating a dilemma for national park management. It's also, of course, within the Wicklow Mountains special area of conservation. That, thankfully, is not something that exists. It's a visual from Newry Mourne and Down District Council for a gondola that is proposed for the lower slopes of Slieve Donard above the town of Newcastle. I think it really illustrates very well how there can be different agendas around mountains. It also illustrates how we're not learning lessons because it's only a few short years since we saw a structure imposed on the Fermanagh side of Quilca. And when a video of people walking up that wooden stairway was shared by a radio station, it went absolutely viral, resulting in 3,500 people visiting Quilca on Easter weekend 2017. That was more than the total number that had visited the previous year, all landing in there on narrow roads over one weekend in the midst of the lambing season as well, which really didn't help for relations with the local community. And the boardwalk at Quilca has received lots of attention. It's generated a whole swathe of management challenges. It sits within the Marble Arch Caves Global Geopark, or sorry, it's now called the Quilca Lakelands Geopark. But it is, yeah, it's a massive challenge, and it illustrates how it often seems to be much easier to get money for capital investment to build a structure than to get the money to manage, maintain that structure and to manage the impact of, I suppose, the impact of increased visitor numbers in a sensitive environment. I think it's also worth mentioning that if you look to, we were looking at Loch Uller, Wicklow Mountains National Park earlier. The only planning for national parks in Ireland in recent years has been funded by Fáilte Ireland, which, despite whatever they might say about sustainability and quality visitor experiences, ultimately is about increasing visitor numbers. I have heard both senior management in NPWS and a previous minister referring to the need to monetize our national parks. Our national parks, I was going to say 6, but as of last week or the week before, we are now going to have 7 national parks. The 6 that we have so far are most certainly meant to be the jewels in our natural environment, jewels in the crown of our natural environment. And sadly, due to historic underinvestment, they haven't been, and the environment in all of those, as it is across much of our uplands, is in poor ecological condition. I should, though, before I say anything more, give full credit to Minister Malcolm Noonan, the current minister with responsibility, who has driven reform of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, who has increased investment and staffing, and who has committed to the development of a management plan for each of our national parks, hopefully in the next year. Challenge number 6, and this is, I suppose, the nub of the whole issue, really. It's that tension between conservation of upland environments and recreation in what is often very sensitive environments. That, incidentally, that photograph was taken in June, coming towards the end of a dry spell, and I think any number of people going up there on that day would have done little further harm to that mountain. It's approaching the summit of Tone Lagee, so you're seeing the impact that has resulted from the escalation in numbers. That's on the Wicklow Gap side of Tone Lagee. And looking to the right of the photograph, you can see how trampling has worn away the heather, and we now have an area of bare and damaged ground, many meters wide. And bear in mind that that's close to the summit of a mountain that's over 800 meters in height. So the growing season up there is about as short as it gets anywhere in the Irish uplands. So the natural capacity of land to recover is really constrained by harsh weather and indeed poor soils. And that is one of the reasons why mountains are just not suitable places for mass tourism. The covering of peat on the Wicklow Mountains, or much of the Wicklow Mountains, certainly adds to the dilemma. And as you all know, peat is not unique to Wicklow either. There's been a path condition survey carried out in the Wicklow Mountains over the last couple of years. The survey findings were presented in Glendalough in August, and the lead surveyor, Chris York from Walking the Talk, really highlighted the particular challenges when you've got trampling on peat, which is at a depth of 30 centimeters or more, and on a gradient, certainly any gradient beyond 15 degrees. The other thing to remember, I mean, there is no quick fix solution, by the way, to erosion in that situation. we obviously need to mitigate the impact as much as we can. There is much that can be done to address path erosion in the Wicklow Mountains. Indeed, the report that Chris presented, the initial work, came to 4,000 days of labour. That's enough to keep a team of 4 people working for 5 years. And needless to say, once you start fixing things, you have a maintenance responsibility as well, and that's not even factored in that figure. So the sensitivity of the environment has to be to the fore. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, and this draws on figures researched by Paul Egan for the Irish Uplands Forum many years ago, is that we really have a very limited stock of mountain land in Ireland. Less than 6% of our land area is above a height of 300 meters. And you can debate where a mountain starts, but once you're at 300 meters, you're definitely into the hills for sure. Then look at the amount of land area that we've got above 600 meters, and all of Ireland's highest mountains are above 600 meters. Less than 1% of our less than half of 1% of our land area. So nationally, we're talking about a really tiny amount of space that's the focus of a lot of recreational expectations, recreational pressure. And, it's changing. The character of many of those places that are above 600 meters does not even look as wild as what's in this photograph. And I think it's worth zooming out a little bit again, that while recreation has an impact, there are other impacts that are greater and that really contribute to, I suppose, changes in the landscape and poor environmental condition across most of our uplands. Historic overgrazing is historic and ongoing heavy grazing is a factor in poor environmental condition. Historic burning has also damaged peatland and disabled its recovery. Extensive afforestation across our uplands as well. Though I want to say that what I've said about things like grazing, it's not a reflection on the actions of any one individual farmer or farmers in general. It's really a reflection on successive agricultural policies that have simply not been well suited to the upland environment. Let's move on a little from that key challenge and look towards capacity. So John O'Callaghan is certainly going to recognise the Croagh-Patrick path team pictured here. The man on the right is Matt McConway. Matt had over 20 years experience of working to address upland path erosion in Scotland before he moved to live in Westport in 2020. And Matt moved over to lead a team of 4 trainees working to address the really huge erosion scar on Croagh-Patrick, Ireland's iconic and holy mountain. And our challenges on mountains are not just about addressing erosion and the physical skills to do so as demonstrated here, but even the skills to diagnose the problem and identify a repair solution and to supervise those repairs. We're missing those skills also. And I think we need to improve understanding amongst people involved in outdoor recreation planning and management of what makes a quality outdoor recreation experience. We need to improve people's understanding of the sensitivity of mountain environments and how in recreation developments we might actually be able to protect biodiversity and also allow people to experience landscape and biodiversity, because it's certainly true. I know many of you on the meeting tonight will really appreciate how being in a more natural and a more natural landscape and a more biodiverse environment enriches the recreation experiences we enjoy. And that's something that people involved in the development of outdoor recreation often don't appreciate. It is also, and I briefly referred to it earlier, it is also the case that it is much easier to get money for hard infrastructure than for the human capacity that enables outdoor recreation to run well in Ireland. That is another key challenge for us. So look, you've had a tour of 7 challenges. I'm going to move on to talk about the opportunities presented in the context of those challenges. But I want to start by highlighting Ireland's National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. It was referred to in John's introduction earlier, developed by Corlin Atuha, and I would like to acknowledge Frank's involvement as the Irish Uplands Forum's main representative on Corlin Atuha, and thank him for all his support over many, many years. I want to tell you just a little bit about the outdoor recreation strategy, because in many ways it responds to so many of the challenges we see in managing recreation in upland areas. The vision within the strategy, it's one that I think is really positive. Ireland's outdoors, a world of activities for all. And it's intended to be inspiring as well. To move us towards that vision, we've identified no less than 97 different actions, which are grouped under 6 different themes. I should mention too that the strategy was developed in a really consultative way with many different stakeholders involved and 2 rounds of public consultation, which I expect some of you contributed to. So the 6 themes or strategic priorities are leadership, and that's referring to leadership within the sector, both at national level and county level, where much of it will play out. The environment, and that refers to protecting the environment and doing better in how we plan and manage recreation, and particularly recreation infrastructure. Awareness, and that refers to awareness of opportunities to participate in outdoor recreation, but particularly awareness around how to be responsible when enjoying Ireland's outdoors. Opportunities, referring to the many opportunities that outdoor recreation opens up for people, but particularly trying to improve participation from underrepresented groups and indeed young people as well. Access, it will not surprise you that there is a theme within the strategy dedicated to access, and some of the other developments I will speak about later come in under that heading. And last but not least, and this is responding to the lack of capacity, is the challenge of developing expertise within the sector. And while I think of it, I would like to mention that Sport Ireland has just commissioned a piece of work to look at the knowledge gaps within the outdoor recreation sector, and that is with a view to updating the training that Sport Ireland provides, particularly for community groups that are involved in trail development. But Sport Ireland, along with the Department of Rural and Community Development, is leading the delivery of the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. So you will see Sport Ireland and at local level, local sports partnerships becoming more involved in outdoor recreation, involved in a wider way than they have been to date. So moving through then to the opportunities, and in response to that challenge of clarity, this one has been on the table for a while. A review of access in Northern Ireland commenced in 2017, was moving rather slowly, but sadly ground to a halt with the Assembly no longer sitting. But the proposals that emerged from that review of outdoor recreation in Northern Ireland, or review of the Access Bill as it stands currently, they are interesting proposals that would bring clear responsibility for outdoor recreation at government level in Northern Ireland, place legal obligations on councils to provide for outdoor recreation in their area through the development of an outdoor recreation plan and the development of a core path network. Some of the other things that were covered in the proposed outdoor recreation bill are, and this won't surprise you, freedom from any potential liability for landowners who have people coming onto their land, or where somebody becomes injured. Currently, the Access Bill in Northern Ireland is really caught up in dealing with any disputes in relation to public rights of way, to the extent that councils really do not get involved in creating public rights of way if they can possibly avoid it. So clearly we need a less costly process for giving certainty of access. And there is also a proposal within the proposals for an outdoor recreation bill. It's not a draft bill, it's simply a proposal being advocated by the recreation sector. A proposal that there should be a statutory right of access to all publicly owned land in Northern Ireland. Probably worth mentioning as well that Northern Ireland actually has proportionately much less publicly owned land than there is in the Republic. It's, I think, as little as 6%, whereas in the South it's probably more like 15% of the land area. Moving through then to a second opportunity to address that lack of clarity around access. You'll recognise Frank Nugent in the centre. Some of you may recognise Trish Walsh, Director of Petersburg Outdoor Education Centre in County Galway, on the left, and I think Trish might even be on the meeting tonight. As John mentioned, Ben Leva, or Mount Gable, is one of two pilot areas for the mountain access project that has been proposed by Corla na Tuatha. This project is on the go a long time, way too long to be still called a pilot, but the renewal of Corla na Tuatha's mandate in 2019 and the impetus around the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy have both brought new energy and a commitment to learn from the experience in the two pilot areas, and that process is ongoing right now, and to expand this model of agreed access to other upland areas. So in brief, what would a mountain access project mean? It means clarity and certainty regarding access in a defined mountain area. It is a physical area, a spatial concept, not a linear concept as we are familiar with marked walking routes like the Wicklow Way, Kerry Way, etc. So it would provide clarity of access for recreational users. It would also provide people with an interest in recreation in the area with the comfort of knowing that landowners are agreeable to access and being able to, I suppose, say that their area is open and welcoming to recreational users. Landowners in the area are already indemnified should somebody become injured on their land. And another important element in making outdoor recreation work well for landowners is that the landowners should have a point of contact should something go wrong in the mountain access area. There's also the provision of necessary infrastructure, and at Ben Leva, for example, their car parks have been developed, which should prevent congestion on the narrow road network around Ben Leva, and stiles to prevent damage to fences. Just practical, common sense things that take the nuisance factor out of recreation activity. There is also a commitment within the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy to develop an upland recreation scheme. And that will be something like the walk scheme, which some of you will be familiar with. The walk scheme is a scheme under which landowners are paid for maintaining a section of a marked walking route that crosses their land. Obviously, we've got to develop a model that works for the uplands, where by and large you don't have marked walking routes. But it would be based on the same principle of landowners being paid for carrying out work to support recreation activity in the mountain area. That is probably enough about Mountain Access Project, so best to keep going. Looking then to our second challenge and the opportunities associated with this. I made brief reference earlier to the changes to the Occupiers Liability Act. Really, really positive development. Even though we had good legislation from 1995 that stood up reasonably well in the courts, it has been made even better with common sense from the Wicklow Way judgment and a couple of other recreation-related judgments being integrated into updated legislation. It further reduces the potential liability of landowners, but probably the biggest, the most significant change in the Occupiers Liability Act is that the ethos of personal responsibility that will be familiar to most of you, of us taking responsibility for our own safety, that is now in law, black and white. Voluntary assumption of risk is part of the law. It means that landowners can assume that people coming onto their land are taking responsibility for their own safety. They're deemed to have accepted that responsibility by their actions or by their words. There doesn't need to be any engagement with the landowner for people to be seen to be taking on their own responsibility for their safety. And I have to say that Minister Helen McEntee, who brought forward these changes as the Minister for Justice, has been really clear in her statements on the changes to the Occupiers Liability Act that the onus is very clearly on those who enter onto property. I think the next challenge around this is getting the word out there, not just to landowners to provide assurance or reassurance to them, but to ensure that everybody heading to the outdoors to engage in recreation activity appreciates the risk that's inherent in their activity and takes responsibility for their own safety. And obviously those risks are there anywhere in the outdoors, on land or on water, not just on the McGillicuddy Reeks, which some of you may recognise from that photograph. There's a second aspect, a second opportunity, I suppose, in relation to giving reassurance to landowners who may have a fear of claims. And that's the approach that's advocated by the UK and Ireland-wide Visitor Safety Group. And the Visitor Safety Group is made up of people that have a role, organisations that have a role in visitor risk management. Mountaineering Ireland actually joined the Visitor Safety Group after the Wicklow Way case, because I had referred to it in the evidence we gave in the court. And what I suppose the Visitor Safety Group approach in a nutshell is that it's about balancing management interventions, like safety interventions, be they fences, steps, so forth, and the visitors' responsibility for their own safety. And you can see the three red highlights on the diagram there. That risk control spectrum is really the backbone of the visitor safety group approach. And what you see is that the responsibility of management and the responsibility of people entering onto land should change depending on the location, so that there should be a higher degree of self-reliance amongst people who are recreating in more remote and rugged locations, many of which are in the uplands. As an organisation, the Visitor Safety Group is involved in awareness events and education right across the recreation sector. And it's really becoming established as best practice in visitor risk management on the island of Ireland. The organisation is going, I'd say, almost 30 years at this stage, but has really become more active in Ireland over the last 10 years. And I would like to acknowledge Vincent McAlinden, who is an absolutely stalwart Mountaineering Ireland volunteer and currently represents us on the Visitor Safety Group's management board. So our next challenge, the clueless. And look, we're all clueless, or we're all clueless. In some places and some activities, we're clueless. And at one point we were all clueless. But this is a major challenge for the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. I'm highlighting responsible dog ownership because it's probably the human behavior, because ultimately it is not the dog's fault, it's the owners and their behavior or their failure to keep their dogs under control that is the most contentious aspect of recreational behavior in upland areas and in other environments. And the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy commits us to national public awareness campaign promoting responsible recreation. That action is going to be led by Sport Ireland. A working group has been formed, which Mountaineering Ireland is represented on, and the process is starting. And we have urged both the Department of Rural and Community Development and Sport Ireland to prioritise public awareness around the need for responsible dog control in Ireland's outdoors. I would like to mention as well, I mean, we're doing things already in advance of that public awareness campaign. Some of you will have seen Mountaineering Ireland's Happy Hiking leaflet or our social media, encouraging people heading out hiking, be that on marked trails or in the hills, to put some thought into planning to take whatever clothing, food, equipment may be appropriate for the length of their outing, and to have an understanding of what to do should something go wrong while they're out there as well. I think it is vital as well that in promoting responsible recreation, that we harness the power of social media. We recognize that social media is a major driver in where people go, what they do in the outdoors. And it follows that by making good and clever use of social media, we should be able to address our challenge of communicating with people who really don't know what they don't know. I don't want to be critical of them. They just don't know what they don't really know. In some cases, maybe some of them deserve criticism, but let's keep it positive. Again, thinking about social media and how it can help us in ensuring that recreation in upland areas is more sustainable. You'll all be familiar with these rusty bits of metal along the western seaboard, but you can see that what Fáilte Ireland has done with the Wild Atlantic Way is they've effectively curated selfie spots or Instagram moments. And were we to do, and in fact, in some ways, it's already happening, recognizing that people can have a mountain experience without going to the top of the mountain. If you think about the route that runs the walking route under Ben Bulben Head, and just recently, there's been a lowland trail developed on the Fermanagh side of Quilca, which provides tremendous views of Quilca's dramatic escarpment without people going onto the sensitive terrain on the mountain summit. And I know the community in Dunlewy are thinking about doing something similar underneath Errigal to provide views of that really shapely peak, but on more sustainable terrain than on the mountain itself. So there are definitely opportunities there. I really couldn't do a presentation about managing the impact of recreation in Ireland's uplands without referring to what is inarguably the most significant impact of recreation in Ireland's uplands, and that is the impact of our cumulative footfall on the hills. I think how the erosion happens is really clear from this photograph. You can see where peat was worn down to the rock, but a bit of vegetation got in the way. People stepped to the side, walked on the peat, killed the heather. So we now have a stretch of bare peat there with no heather. And you can see the branches of heather on the right-hand side. And one of the reasons I've put that in is to highlight that we make choices literally every time we go out. We make choices about our route, and peat is really vulnerable when it's wet. When ground conditions are wet, it is more important than ever for us to choose the most robust route we can. And that presents a challenge, particularly to our clubs, where you've got a program agreed in advance. We are urging clubs and leaders within clubs to be flexible, and when ground conditions are poor, to consider rerouting your walk to, especially if you're likely to have a big group, to avoid any badly eroded or really soft, boggy, sensitive terrain. Even to consider things like reversing your route, because the impact of our footfall is greater when we walk downhill than when we walk uphill. So just reversing the route by itself could make a difference. And one of the reasons it's so vitally important that we try to mitigate the impact of our footfall is because it is impossible that we will ever be able to repair all of the trampled lines, certainly on the Wicklow Mountains, because we've done a study, 167 kilometers of eroded lines surveyed, and quite a high proportion of it is on deep and steep peat where there is no easy fix solution. But it would simply cost way too much money. It would never be affordable to fix everything. So we have got to recognize that we are part of the problem, and we need to be part of the solution by making good choices that help protect the mountains, and accepting that sometimes that is going to mean a compromise for us as well. But it's part of, I suppose, taking responsibility for the places that we love, places that we get so much benefit from, and helping to protect them. And part of, often when we're developing advice in relation to good practice, we think in terms of do this, do that. And one of our members pointed out to me a couple of years ago that we were often preaching to the converted. So when we developed this messaging last year, we took a different approach. We took the approach of thanking people for what they do well. So we're highlighting the desired behaviours, but articulating them as a thank you. And the thank you, it comes from the mountain, not from any authority figure, not from Mountaineering Ireland. It's a thank you from the mountain for the actions that people have taken to care for the mountain, be that taking care in how they parked, leaving their dog at home, leaving no litter behind, and simply celebrating the beauty of the mountains. So we're interested in any feedback or thoughts that people have about that positive approach. So challenge number 5, and commercialization. As well already highlighted, mountains really aren't capable of sustaining mass tourism. So as far as possible, we want to try and ensure that the commercialization, and that could be big, it could be tourism development, or it could be simply the increased number of people taking groups for payment in upland areas. The same advice as for walking groups applies, but with an added responsibility where somebody is making a living, to choose the most robust route possible. And certainly for events and things like that, as far as possible to keep to marked managed routes where there is an access agreement in place, rather than the general sphere in the uplands where it's informal access without any permission underpinning it. Even where there's a long tradition of access, it's quite likely that nobody has ever asked all the landowners in that area, are they happy for access across their land? That is a process that will take place in the mountain access areas, but I think even with great support from the department, the expansion of mountain access model across the country will be incremental. The other dimension of commercialization is, yes, there's a need for services in uplands areas. Many will recognise the Glenmalure Lodge, a fantastic family business in the Glenmalure Valley, County Wicklow, providing food and accommodation to walkers, a really busy spot at weekends and during the summer. But the other side of that, the Glenmalure Lodge is equally popular amongst local people. And if recreational users use services, be they pubs, restaurants, buses, accommodation in upland areas, even just going and buying a sandwich in a shop, as we did last week in the Comaras in Ballymacarbery, that little bit of business helps to keep those shops and premises open, and they provide services not just for people involved in recreation, but it's a service to the host community in the area that you're visiting. And it helps to improve quality of life for people living in those areas. So yeah, there's lots in the commercialization, but lots of opportunity for us to put something back into the places that we get so much benefit from. So the conservation dilemma. That photograph of Kirkpatrick was taken a few years before any of the work commenced on Kirkpatrick, and even, well, today it looks different, and over time it will look better and better. But the tremendous work that's been done by the PATH team on Kirkpatrick, and I should acknowledge too that they are supported by a dedicated band of Mountaineering Ireland volunteers, and John O'Callaghan is one of those. That work has only been made possible by the Kirkpatrick stakeholders group and the very patient, measured process they went through to bring together all of the different interests in the mountain. And on Kirkpatrick, there are more interests than on many others, more commercial interests. The church has a big say on Kirkpatrick, wouldn't necessarily be stakeholders in other areas. Mountain Rescue, National Parks and Wildlife Service, the local community in Murrisk. The County Council played an absolutely key role through Martin Keating, who's the chair of the Kirkpatrick Stakeholders Group, and has since retired from Mayo County Council, but is keeping on his role as chair of the Stakeholders Group. And what Martin helped and facilitated the Stakeholders Group to do was to find their common ground and to set aside their sectoral interests and put the mountain first, to put the best interest of the mountain at the centre of their discussions. And that was how they found a way forward. It's a model that's been used in other areas as well, and really is quite compelling. So a really important lesson and an opportunity for other areas. I talked a bit about the poor environmental condition across our mountains, and that photograph is from Wicklow Mountains National Park. And sad to say, for those not familiar with the Wicklow Mountains, the vast tracts of bare peat are widespread across the Wicklow Mountains. We have hundreds of hectares of bare peat in the national park alone, never mind some of it beyond. The man on the left in that photograph is Hugh McLinden, who was the conservation ranger for that area. He's since been promoted to district conservation officer within the national park. And Hugh spearheaded a peatland restoration project on Barnacullion, and he's pictured there briefing a bunch of Mountaineering Ireland volunteers turning up for their first day to spread heather brash across the bare peat. The brash in the white bags behind was cut on another mountain, Paddock Hill. So that's the cutting of the heather there has actually improved the habitat diversity by creating a mosaic of heather heights on Paddock Hill. And the brash being spread here provides a cover across the bare peat, and that helps prevent the peat blowing away in dry times, windy times, and washing away when it's wet, because you would be amazed at the mobility of peat. Peat is a precious resource, and when it doesn't have a cover of vegetation is really vulnerable. There has been fencing involved as well in selected sites, spreading of grass seed and fertilizer to encourage the grass to grow. The grass will die off once there's no longer fertilizer, but it will create a bit of shelter for some of the slower growing species like heather to come on. And that area is already greened up. The technique being used has been used by Moors for the Future in the Peak District in England with success, I think, after a period of about 5 years having a full cover of vegetation. Clearly, it would be an enormous task to extend this across the vast bare peat in the Wicklow Mountains. But look, every bit of peat that we can save improves water quality. And right now, any of that damaged peat, never mind the bare peat, even drained peatlands, are all emitting carbon into the atmosphere. So if we can stop the peat blowing and flowing away and slow the flow of water from these sites, gradually re-wetting the peat, we can turn peatlands back into the valuable carbon store that they should be. And a huge amount of the work done by the volunteers who've just finished their second season has been constructing wooden dams at points around the bare peat to slow that flow of water. So thank you to the volunteers involved, including the Rewild Wicklow volunteers and the students on work experience who have all rowed in and supported Hugh and his colleagues in this really important project. Capacity, yeah, that is the Kirkpatrick team, the 5 of them. I think it's amazing that almost 3 years after they started, the same team of 5 is still together. They have worked in dreadful weather conditions, doing really, really tough physical work. If you take a pickaxe to that path on Croagh Patrick, you will feel the shock reverberate through your bones and joints. The fact that they have done this for 3 years and they're still smiling is just amazing. The team are Matt on the left, David, Bernard, Frank, and Frank is a Mountain Mehel member and well known to many Mountaineering Ireland members. And on the right-hand side, Tulio, who's from Brazil, but is probably the most Mayo of the lot, lives in Westport, married to a Mayo woman as well. But of course, you know, the skills that they've applied in working on Croagh Patrick, that's just one example of all the skill we need. I've referred to that already. But there's a huge amount we can do in building capacity within the outdoor recreation sector in Ireland. The National Outdoor Recreation Strategy will support us in that, and as we build the expertise to deliver the strategy. So that takes us almost to the end of our 7 challenges. One of the important aspects around building capacity, the value of people on the ground. Some of you may know Peter Raftery, who was, not sure if he still is, he leads walks in the Mournes, but he also worked as an engagement ranger for the Mourne Heritage Trust. And this photograph was taken on one of Peter's days on duty. The 2 people having the well-deserved cuppa had noticed some smoke in the forest in the back there, in the Happy Valley in the Mournes. They spoke with the ranger about it, and the ranger got support from Peter, got support from his colleague Carol. They carried 140 litres of water in to dampen down what was the remains of somebody's campfire. And Peter and the Carol and the 2 people pictured there, 2 walkers, carried out the rubbish from the campfire to the car park as well. So a lovely example of cooperation. And the Engagement Ranger program in the Mournes has shown the huge value of having people on the ground to engage with people coming into the hills, to encourage responsible recreation, to educate people. They are essential steps in ensuring that outdoor recreation runs smoothly in Ireland's upland areas. I want to mention one last opportunity, and I suppose to highlight the huge importance and the contribution of communities in upland areas. You may have noticed Carja na Herigla, Friends of Errigal, and everything that has happened around Errigal in recent years has been driven by an absolutely tremendous community group in Dunlewy. The trustees of the group are pictured there with the chair of Carja na Herigla and also the chief executive from the local authority. The community has brought together, they've worked with the local authority really well, worked with landowners, have brought in other organisations, including Mountaineering Ireland, and Ursula McPherson represents us on Carja na Herigla. I too have attended many meetings talking about how we deal with the erosion problems at Errigal. I do want to draw a distinction between the work that's been done at Errigal and the work at Croagh Patrick, because it's been an entirely different approach at Errigal. The council, having secured funding, decided to procure a contractor to come and do the work. And the work is good, but the team at Croagh Patrick have a very different relationship with the path on Croagh Patrick, and they've been able to work in an iterative way, do a piece of work, see how it's working out, go back and do more if need be. When you're working with contractors, for them, it's a commercial imperative. The sooner they get the job done, the more profit they make. So the Errigal path doesn't blend into the landscape as well as the Croagh-Patrick one. But nonetheless, it is solid work and it's helping. But the community there at Dunlewy have recognised that, you know, bringing more visitors, income and activity into Dunlewy is not just about Errigal. It's about the whole hinterland to the mountain. It's about creating other opportunities for people to engage in recreation in the area, and about providing those visitors with services and accommodation as well. It's a really, really positive example of community involvement in upland management and a multi-stakeholder group as well. I couldn't do a presentation without showing flowers somewhere. So here we are in the Burren, looking at mountain avens, one of our Burren specialities. And I've included this partly as a reminder of the sensitivity of the upland environment, but again to remind us how our experiences in the uplands are all the richer for being in a healthy biodiverse environment and indeed a natural landscape with the absence of man-made structures. But I think from all the opportunities associated with the challenges that I've highlighted, you will appreciate that recreation needs management and that it costs, and it's not just the cost of hard infrastructure, it's the cost of building expertise and having people on the ground to engage with landowners to agree access, developing the skills to create appropriate infrastructure, and developing also the skills needed for the protection and restoration of our upland environments, and the skills to communicate effectively with the public to ensure that people enjoying the uplands are careful and responsible in how they do their activities. I suppose the last thing I want to say is that, yeah, every challenge is an opportunity. Numbers recreating in the uplands are increasing, but the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy provides us with a blueprint, and I think all of you know the benefits that can come from outdoor recreation in the uplands. We know we feel happier and healthier, and the physical health benefits are clear as well: less risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, all of those good things, plus people's enjoyment of green and blue spaces creates a bond with nature and makes people more environmentally aware, which is going to be really important for Ireland as we meet the challenges of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis as well. So thank you very much for your patience and your interest. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Helen, for an extremely informative and highly reflective and well-structured presentation. I really enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you so much. And I know there were lots of references to Croagh-Patrick there along the way, and I'd just like to welcome my fellow volunteer, Phil McHale, who's also with us this evening. I know you were paying tribute to everyone when you were talking, but I'll say no more now and just hand over to anyone who wants to put a question to Helen.
I want to thank you even more for your patience, having seen that I went over time. Obviously, when I was talking to myself today, I was faster.
You're all right, no bother.
John, could I ask a question?
Sorry, sure, Deirdre, go ahead.
Sorry, thanks a million, Helen. That was great. Really brilliant exposition of the challenges and the opportunities. I'd just like to ask you about the the resourcing, I guess, for the outdoor recreation strategy and, you know, the structures at the county level and stuff, is that rolling out, or is that still a work in progress, or how is that happening?
It's starting to roll out, Deirdre. The invitation has just gone out to local authorities and local sports partnerships to put in expressions of interest for the first 4 outdoor recreation coordinator posts that are being created. These are pilots, and in time, hopefully, every county will have an outdoor recreation coordinator to lead the development of an outdoor recreation plan for their county and the delivery of the actions. So those 4 initial posts are being funded through the Department of Rural and Community Development. I think there is an expectation that every county will move ahead with the development of its outdoor recreation plan, and the outdoor recreation infrastructure scheme, the ORIS funding, is increasingly going to be based on the priorities that are identified in the county plans.
John, could I ask a question?
Sure, Mary, is it?
Yes, it's Mary.
Yes.
Thanks a million, Helen. That was a really good presentation. Appreciate it very
Thanks,
much.
Mary.
I have a question about citizen science, because I'm doing a lot of work in biodiversity action plans at the moment, and I'm suggesting all my groups that I work with should be doing citizen science projects. And a lot of those now are being set up by National Biodiversity Data Centre, you know, some of the NGOs, etc. So I was wondering, what do you think of the potential for MI members to get involved in any kind of citizen science project? Have you thought about that?
Yes, so we tried it a while back with regard to upland path erosion and didn't get much take up, but we have been getting a much better response as we've encouraged people to report biodiversity records, particularly using the biodiversity data capture app. It does increase people's connection with biodiversity. It also, you know, it increases people's learning and curiosity. It's something we have done through our Walking with Wildlife publications. We've done one for Northern Ireland, also one for the Coomera Mountains, and we've a couple more in our plans for next year. So yeah, absolutely. I certainly do see a benefit in that. We encourage all of our clubs to appoint an environmental officer, and it is one of the many suggestions for what an environmental officer might do. We couldn't possibly record everything we see, or we'd never get a hike done. But if we all recorded just 1 or 2 things from every day that we're out, it would add considerably to the knowledge base about the species that are in the mountains and help support the case for protecting the places we care about.
You could possibly do this systematically as well, Helen. The Botanical Society of the British Isles have a project every new year, and over about a week, people record the flowering plants that they see in their locality. So this happens every year, done by volunteers. So it's something you could think about, that a limited amount of time, you know, when everyone's up in the mountains, to record the species that are flowering, you know. So then you'd have a systematic data that you could compare, maybe, you know.
Yes, I've looked at that in the past. Thought it was it seems to be done in a different way as a New Year plant hunt.
Yes.
But if casual records are welcome, then certainly we'll encourage members to contribute those. It's quite a novelty to find anything in flower up in the hills on the 1st of January. So
yes,
it's worth, but not impossible.
Yes, yes. And the other thing, Helen, you never mentioned Leave No Trace in terms of, you know, behavioral program or a project or, you know, aspirations. So are you less enthusiastic about Leave No Trace?
Mountaineering Ireland's not currently a partner in the Leave No Trace programme, though we were founders, and I myself am trained as a Leave No Trace advanced trainer. But the Leave No Trace approach is embedded in everything that we've been talking about there with regard to responsible recreation. And even with regard to the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy, Leave No Trace is a member of Comhairle na Tuatha, and along with us, part of the group, looking at how we encourage responsible recreation and develop that public awareness campaign. But Leave No Trace themselves would acknowledge that we probably need a different headline for that public awareness, that the phrase Leave No Trace is somewhat cryptic, particularly for the general public. I particularly like what Leave No Trace has done with their summer awareness campaign over the last few years, using Love This Place. It's a bit clearer, a bit more positive. So yes, we're working with Leave No Trace, and we may well go back in as partners at some stage. But yeah, we're all at one in the spirit of what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Emil.
Thanks very much, Mary. Anyone else? We do have about 5 or 6 minutes if anyone would like to.
Are there any, I haven't been looking in the chat. Are there any questions in the chat?
No, there aren't actually. No.
Grant. Okay.
Well, I just like Frank Nugent here. I just like to congratulate Helen on her work over just so many years. I mean, her contribution to her communication on behalf of recreational users to all those stakeholders at governmental level. It's totally it's invaluable. I don't think recreational users have a better spokesperson. And I'm just so proud of her.
Well, Frank, thank you very much. And my involvement in the Irish Uplands Forum and my work with Mountaineering Ireland probably both have something to do with a chance meeting with Frank Nugent decades ago while I worked in an advertising design company, and Frank was across the road working for Foss in Upper Bagot Street. So thank you, Frank, too.
Okay.
Sorry, John, could I just make a little announcement, please, before we finish?
Oh, sure, Deirdre. Yes, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. Just to say to everybody, before we thank Helen, the final webinar will be held in the series on the 15th of November, and it will be presented by Derek McLaughlin, who manages the Wild Atlantic Nature, the EU Life programme, looking at 26 SACs on the west coast from Clare to Donegal. So Derek will be presenting on the work programme and the results to date from that. So just to flag that for you. Rio will be sending out a notice to all our members and member organisations. But if you just go onto our website there and you'll see the listing under the events for the Zoom link if you're not a member of our partner organisations. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thanks very much. And once again, thank you to everyone for attending tonight. And most of all, thank you, Helen, for a fabulous presentation.
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for your patience and your interest. Thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, thank you to the Irish Uplands Forum for keeping the flag flying over decades as well. It's really great to have an organisation that brings together the different interests in the mountains. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Well done, Helen. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Helen.
See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.